Michael Burry says that the United States is in a recession by any definition possible. Just a couple of days ago, Michael Burry tweeted this. He said that inflation peaked, but this is not the last peak of this inflationary cycle. He says that we're likely to see lower CPI. We might even see negative inflation in the second half of 2023, but that's also going to push the United States into a recession by any definition. And the Federal Reserve Bank will then be forced to cut interest rates, and the government will be forced to stimulate. And then we will have even higher inflation and another inflation spike. It's not that hard. So Michael Burry has some negative views about where the economy is going. For those of you who don't know, Michael Burry is the famous investor who shorted the housing market before the 2008 crash, and that made them not only very successful, but also very famous. Now, I've been doing these types of market recaps on my Minority Mindset channel, and then I stopped doing them a while ago, but I've received so many messages of people saying, hey, can you please bring these market recaps back? I've been focusing more on the educational stuff on the Minority Mindset channel, and so now I'm going to try another test. We're going to try doing these types of market recaps occasionally on this Minority Mindset Clips channel. So if you want to see more of that like this, let me know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to the Minority Mindset Clips channel. I'll try to add in more of this type of content here. So the issue going on right now is essentially our economy here in the United States is slowing. We saw Salesforce announce layoffs today. Goldman Sachs said that they're going to be doing mass layoffs in the coming weeks. We've had a lot of layoffs already into 2023, and 2023 just started, 4 days ago. So we're seeing our economy slow because of that. And the reason why our economy is slowing is because of high inflation. Now, the Fed is working to bring inflation down. How are they working to bring inflation down? By raising interest rates. Raising interest rates brings inflation down, but it also brings the economy down. Higher interest rates makes it more expensive to borrow money, and it makes debt more expensive. All these corporations that you hear about doing layoffs, pretty much all of them have record levels of debt. And these debts are not fixed rate debts. They're variable interest rate debts. So their costs are rising because now the cost of paying these debts is going up. And so they have to cut their costs. How are they cutting the costs? Well, many of them are doing layoffs. So people are losing incomes because of that. Now, what Michael Burry is saying is that the Federal Reserve Bank is going to continue raising interest rates, and that's going to push the United States into a recession. We've been talking about this for over a year now, that the higher interest rates are going to have negative consequences, even though a year ago, in January of 2022, the Federal Reserve Bank said that raising interest rates, one, is not a priority because a year ago, inflation wasn't that big of a deal. And second, the Federal Reserve Bank said 12 months ago that when they do eventually decide to raise interest rates, it wouldn't affect the job market and it would not affect the economy because our economy is so robust. Well, clearly they were wrong. And now here we are today where the Federal Reserve Bank is working to raise interest rates aggressively to bring inflation down, and we are not technically in a recession, although by all intensive purposes, most Americans are already in a recession and feeling the pains of a recession, but it hasn't been declared that we're in a recession, because in order to be declared in a recession, the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, has to actually say that we're in a recession. They haven't done that. And the way that they define a recession, I actually have their definition here, is, quote, a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and that lasts more than a few months. So the reason why they're saying that we're not technically in a recession is because they're saying that we're not actually seeing a real downturn in the economy. But that's besides the point. These are just semantics. For all intents and purposes, we are essentially in a recession. Now, the next issue is, if Michael Burry is right, where we go into a recession, the question is, how bad will it be? And the Federal Reserve Bank has been saying that if we do enter a recession, it's going to be a soft landing. It's not going to be that big of a deal. You've heard a lot of people say that. Now, a little grain of salt, the Federal Reserve Bank has been wrong many times. They said inflation was transitory. They said that raising interest rates would not affect the job market. And they also said that raising interest rates would not affect the economy. Now they're saying that higher interest rates is not going to put us into a real recession. It would only be a soft landing, if anything. But what Michael Burry is saying is, no, we're going to see a bad recession. And when we see a bad recession, it is going to force the government and the Federal Reserve Bank to start stimulating. Now, these are things that we've been talking about in Market Briefs, my free financial newsletter, which if you haven't joined yet, make sure you do that. It's a completely free way for you to stay up to date on what's happening in the financial markets when it's happening. So if you haven't joined Market Briefs, I'll put that link for you down in the description below as well. But what Michael Burry is saying is that when you enter that, then we're going to be forced to stimulate. That means the Federal Reserve Bank will be forced to cut interest rates and the government will be forced to do more stimulus. And this could be in the form of things like potentially stimulus checks or more government spending or whatever. The government spending more money than they have. What does that do? Well, just like the 2020 stimulus and spending, it created inflation. And so this is the worry that Michael Burry is talking about. That inflation, while we have seen the peak temporarily, he's saying that it has not peaked overall in this cycle. He's not saying that it's going to peak higher in 2023 necessarily, but in the next coming years, he's saying that inflation will peak higher than where we were before, because then when the Federal Reserve Bank starts cutting interest rates and the government starts spending, that's going to cause more inflation because more money will flow into our economy, and then that will make the inflation problem even worse. So you can start to see this little teeter-totter where we had high inflation. Now the Federal Reserve Bank wanted to fight high inflation. So what do? They raise interest rates. But that causes a slowing economy. So now the economy becomes a bigger problem. And then the Federal Reserve Bank wants to fight the economy by now stimulating. Now that brings the economy back to normal, but now inflation gets worse. But now when you have high inflation, that makes the economy problem worse. So you can start to see how this can become a really big problem. This is why Jerome Powell from the Federal Reserve Bank has said, up until now, time and time again, that the most important thing is not the economic slowdown, it's inflation. Because if we cannot get the inflationary problems under control, we're going to have much more severe and much more significant consequences. And this is what Michael Burry is saying, that he doesn't believe that the Federal Reserve Bank is going to stick to their word. Because up until now, the Federal Reserve Bank has said that they're going to do whatever it takes to bring inflation down. And if they stick with that, they're going to continue raising interest rates even if we go into a recession. Michael Burry is saying that's not going to happen. He's saying that we're going to go into a recession and the Fed is going to change their mind and they're going to flip-flop. Which one's going to happen? Well, only time will tell. We don't know if the Fed is going to flip-flop, but what we do know is what other institutions are saying. Like Bank of America came out over the weekend and they also gave their opinions about the economy. And what they said is that a recession is, quote, not baked in. It's not for certain. We might be able to avoid it. But I would agree that the outlook by most people who sit in the position that 2023 could be a difficult year is possible. So essentially Bank of America is saying that no, a recession is not necessary. We don't have to see an economic slowdown, but the people who do think that we see an economic slowdown have some right to say that, essentially. So you have all these different opinions. The Federal Reserve Bank, the government are here on this polar extreme who are saying there's nothing to worry about. If we see a recession, it'll be a mild recession. That is kind of the worst that we could potentially see. Then on the other hand, we have Michael Burry, who is saying we're already in a recession. And not just that, the Federal Reserve Bank doesn't realize how bad this inflation problem is. And then when the Federal Reserve Bank doesn't realize how bad this inflation problem is, the recession will actually hit. And then when the recession actually hits, that's when the inflation problem will get even worse. So you have these two kind of polar opposite extremes. My goal for you is not to try to predict what happens. Obviously, we have our own opinions. You have your own opinion. I have my own. I believe that our economy has more economic pain coming, but that's my opinion. The opinions don't matter. What I want you to do now is understand what's happening. That way you can make smart decisions with your money. That means 1, start preparing financially, and 2, be financially educated. That way you can take advantage of whatever opportunities might come your way. Because the reality is, look, recessions, market crashes create more millionaires than any other time. And you don't want to miss the opportunities that might come your way. That means right now you need to be prepared. Start putting aside cash. Cash for emergency savings in case something happens to your company, your job, your income. That way you can take care of yourself and your family. And then you also want to have cash to be able to capitalize on investments. The reason why recessions create more millionaires than any other time is because you have some investors, the minority of investors, who are prepared. You prepare when things are okay. That way you can take advantage of opportunity when things are not okay. So you have some investors that save up for that opportunity, and then they see the opportunity, and then they can come in and buy. At the same time, the majority of people either are running away or they don't have the cash, the money available to actually pounce on the opportunity. And so this is where understanding how this cycle works, because this has been happening not for a decade, but for decades and centuries. This has happened again and again and again. This is the first time that we have YouTube to educate about it, but this has been happening forever. This is where now understanding how the system works, that way you can start preparing now and be financially educated. That way, if you see an opportunity come your way, you can come in and invest and buy a distressed asset at a discounted price. Now, of course, are you guaranteed to make money when you invest? No, you're never guaranteed to make money when you invest, which is why you want to always do your own due diligence and never blindly trust a random guy on YouTube. But this is where the financial education comes in handy.